Hi, I'm Cecily Course for the Trailer Talks. Come on in.
The Trailer Talks is sponsored by Imaging DNA. Find out more at imagingdna.com.
All right, fantastic.
So, if you could introduce yourself, just your name and what it is that you do.
Okay. My name is Jeff Hester, and I am by training and background an astrophysicist. I was part of the team that flew the first camera that flew on Hubble and part of the team that fixed it. And I've seen my work show up in places like a postage stamp and the cover of Time magazine. So that's an interesting career. What I do these days is very different. What I do is I speak, I advise, I coach, all around the message. The kind of the punchline is that some of what you think you know is fine, but some isn't. And the rub is that you don't know which is which. And in a very rapidly changing high-stakes world, more often than not, whether you're talking about your business, your career, or even your personal life, that success and failure kind of hang on that. And so what I do is help people in all of those different contexts try to get into better touch with the difference between what they think is true and what really is true.
How did you get here? Tell us about your journey thus far.
Oh man, that we could spend the full hour talking about that. I've been a science geek since I was a kid. Some of my very earliest memories were watching them bolt the Mercury astronauts into the little tin cans that they called capsules back then. And you know, I grew up in the midst of that. In high school, a friend of mine and I used to build telescopes and do astrophotography and that kind of stuff. And one thing led to another, and after starting college as a physics major, I sort of became an astrophysics major, and so what started as an avocation morphed into a vocation, which is really the right way to do it. From there, went to graduate school, headed off to Caltech to work on the Hubble Space Telescope project, and a very short time after graduate school, kind of found myself at ground zero for one of the most exciting pieces of science history ever. And that was a heck of a ride, to be honest about it. Hubble went from being the jewel in the crown of NASA science. People were selling it as this is going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread, to overnight being the butt of jokes on late night television. And I was part of the process of building the camera that fixed that. When people think of Hubble now, they think of it as this great, wonderful thing. And I was part of the process of bringing that to be. So kind of that's in very brief terms has been the flow of my career. I've spent the last 20 years, I was a member of the faculty at Arizona State University. Over that time, I became more and more interested in the communication and educational aspects of it. And by education, obviously, I'm a university professor, I teach, but I'm talking about more broadly than that. I came to realize that there was a core message here that went way beyond just here's this neat stuff we know about the universe, and touched something that was really more deeply human.
When I first looked at your bio when it first came in, it was like, huh, an astrophysicist on a speaking tour. This ought to be fun. It sounds like the start of a joke. Come on. He's got to be wicked successful because otherwise there's just no way he's out here.
Well, it's an interesting life.
So tell me about that jump from to the speaking stuff that you're doing now to business. What was that first? How did that happen?
It was one of those things that developed slowly until it happened all at once. I was working too hard. I think for a while I had, 8 or 10 graduate students and postdocs that I was supporting. I had half a dozen grants and contracts. I was sitting on committees all over the country. I was writing a textbook. And you can only work 80 and 90-hour weeks back to back to back for so long before it finally starts to catch up with you. And so that's kind of where I was. And I knew that something needed to change. As a very wise man once told me, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. And it had sort of ceased to be fun. Then all at once, a colleague of mine came down the hall, knocked on the door, stuck his head in, and said, mentioned a guy who was a colleague and friend of ours who had just died, and I'd not heard it. And I was kind of taken aback. And the story went on that he had literally been sitting in his office, working, pounding away at the keyboard, and he had a heart attack, and he keeled over, did a face plant in his keyboard, and that's how his life ended. And my immediate response to that was one of horror. If that's what my life is going to wind up being, then why don't I just go out and lay down in traffic now, for crying out loud? And so I was at a point, we had raised 3 kids. They were out of the house, off doing their own things. So that kind of responsibility and need for stability was gone. And I just decided it was time to go do something different. So that was where it started.
Wow. So what's your creative process like now? Has it changed?
Oh, man. I create well when I'm sitting down and talking to somebody. A conversation like the one that we're having right now is a kind of a forum that I can be creative in, the give and take. What I will say, though, is that after that, that's sort of a part of creativity that everybody thinks about. But the other part of creativity, and a part that is important to me and also kind of central to my message, is that after you do all of that free thinking, association, so on and so forth, you then have to get serious about it. And getting serious about it means that you have to sit down and take all of those ideas and then do everything that you can do to shoot them down. My punchline is never bet the farm on an idea that you haven't tried to kill first. And so creativity is sort of going back and forth between free thinking, out of the box, association, seeing relationships, having ideas and letting them run, followed by bringing all of that hard up against the real world and seeing what actually can hold water. An idea can be absolutely beautiful, but if it doesn't conform to the way the world really is, then the world doesn't care about what I think.
This is kind of a funky question, but since we are a podcast about creativity, what part does creativity play in science, in your opinion?
I have had opportunity to think about that a lot. One of the images, as I said, an image that I took that's been called the Pillars of Creation, people look at and respond to. And they respond to it as art. They respond to its beauty. And in the process of talking about that, I talked earlier about the extent to which my creative process is fueled by conversations. In talking to people about that, it caused me to think about, what are people responding to? And what I came to understand is that people were responding on an artistic level to that image, to exactly the same things that I was responding to on a scientific level. That is, there's pattern in the midst of complexity there, and that engages us as humans. And so I could pose a question. I could say, my job is to look at the world around me, to find in that world patterns that I think are meaningful, and then to communicate those to other people so that they can see their significance too. What am I? that description applies equally well to a scientist and to an artist. Science and art are both scratching the same basic itch in who we are as humans, that process of finding pattern in the midst of the world is kind of very fundamental to what makes us human. And in fact, if you talk to scientists, scientists will talk about playing with an idea. They will talk about the beauty of an experiment. They will talk about the elegance of some piece of apparatus. And they're using all of those terms in exactly the same way that a group of artists would be talking about beauty and elegance and play. The big difference between science and art is not on the creative end, it's on the jury end. If I'm an artist, if I'm a musician, I perform and I gauge the reaction of the audience. A little more cynically, you perform, and if people throw money, then clearly what you're doing has value. That's not really what I think, but you get the idea. As a scientist, on the other hand, the jury process is different. What you have to do as a scientist is you have to take that product of your creativity and go out and ask the real world if that corresponds with what is. And this goes back a little bit to the earlier question of how you communicate across that barrier between science and engineering and those kinds of ideas and an audience that is not versed in those things. It's really science, art, creativity are really all the same thing, and they are an expression of what it is to be human.
So what's the one thing that you think everyone should know about living a life creatively, or about the journey in general?
Probably the one thing that I'd say is that when you do it, where you're going to end up is going to be different than where you thought that you were going to end up. That when you step off the curb into traffic, you're going to have to be adaptable. You're going to have to go where the wind takes you a little bit. And if you're not comfortable with the uncertainty, and if you're not uncomfortable with the understanding that this is going to be a bit of a roller coaster ride, then that might not be a process that's for you. So that's probably the one thing, is to go into it with your eyes open and don't expect it to be easy, because it's not.
Well, hey, thanks for being on the Trailer Talks.
Well, it was my pleasure. Good conversation, and I think it's a fun thing that you're doing.
Google Jeff Hester. He's got a YouTube channel and a website, jeff-hester.com. While you're out there, check out our website at thetrailertalks.com. Cool. Hang on, we gotta wait for the ice cream man to go by now. Really, guys?
Understood.
Yeah, ice cream man comes around an awful lot. In fact, I'm sort of like, are you selling ice cream? Or is there something more interesting in that truck?
Yes, exactly.
Just a question. Yeah, I need none of it, but